been in the right place, but it must have been the wrong time. I done said
Hey, did you ever make a wrong turn? I realize that's what I'm doing. I'm correcting them. I'm trying to correct a mistake. That's revisiting a node. That's our episode today. I finally figured some stuff out. Oh boy, you go on a trip, and it's fascinating where it takes you. And so I've been looking back, and I've been trying to change the world, just trying to come up with a better way. Just trying to understand how we got to where we are. With the menacing mango, the terrible tangerine, who is nothing more than a byproduct of our civilization. So I have the rudiments of a mathematical formula for civilization, based in information theory, but we won't go there today. We'll save that math wackiness for trying to get it published. But what I wanted to talk about was that I just realized I was just watching Stranger Things, and its retro visit to the 80s and capturing the people and the times and the culture. And I realized that was the node. So a node, to an evolutionary biologist or to a gardener, if you know plants are nodes are branch points in a tree, in a bush, in a shrub. And the evolutionary trees, first proposed by Chucky D, I have nodes. That's the really cool thing. It's estimated there were at least 40 significant nodes between early bacterial life and humans. That at different points in evolution, something mutated and selective pressure was applied and an adaptation evolved. An adaptation could be a response to a threat or to an opportunity. It varies depending on what the adaptation was. But that's our understanding of evolution by the mechanism of natural selection, as defined by Charles Darwin. And so what happened at each point? At what point when humans could speak a little more? I mean, chimps talk. You can record chimp calls and play them back and see distinctively different behaviors based on the specific calls that were recorded. I've read reports of a call from a predator showing up like an eagle or a hawk, and a warning call going out, and some of our fellow primates diving under cover, appreciating that there is an aerial threat, as opposed to distinct other calls that apparently responded to ground threats, which drove our primate cousins into the trees. So communication is a critical thing, being able to talk about things. And obviously humans took a leap, though, because chimps do it. They have that basic trait. They can communicate verbally at least some information. But we've taken it, obviously, to a whole nother level, which is how we've evolved civilizations. We operate on this whole separate level of information processing. That's the really cool thing about understanding civilization, is that a civilization, just like living systems, depend on information. We all capture certain information, and that's the essence of any given civilization. It's wrapped up in the modus vivendi of its economy and its government and its belief system. Those are the big three variables that define any significant civilization. And we're constantly experimenting with it. We experiment with our relationships with smaller versions. And as those individual experiments are carried out, some civilizations persist, others fall by the wayside. And so what have we been doing with our mega civilization, our national civilization? In the United States, I'm an American. I was born in 1960. I was born at the tail end of the baby boomers in the middle of the American Empire. I was pretty much born on the plateau of the American Empire. If you could graph influence, significance for a civilization, you would see that different civilizations have surged to the top of the charts at different points in history. At the end, in 1900, it was the British Empire. They ruled the world, ruled Britannia. They ruled the seas. The sun never set on the British Empire. A few hundred years before that, the sun never set on the Spanish Empire. Because what happened? Science happened. So I've been talking about the evolving church of science, but science is the primary selective pressure that has been applied to large civilizations for the last 500 years. You could argue the origins of science with common sense. I'm sure people were experimenting. Francis Bacon gets credited with the scientific method in terms of the very precise process of hypothesizing and observing and experimenting, analyzing your data, and seeing if you can confirm or defeat your hypothesis, and then moving on to build theories. Because once we really standardized science and we started solving problems, and people realized, oh, wait a minute, we can use this process to do just about anything. It's been a marvelous thing. It's created empires. The first really big technological applications of science were astronomy for navigation, along with the lateen sail and the different mechanics of naval architecture. But what happened with the Dutch and the Portuguese and then the Spanish was global trade. They were the first ones to really figure it out. The Chinese had a big fleet years before. They pulled back, minimizing those costs. We've had empires. We've had Incas and Chinese and Indians and African and all sorts of empires. But let's look at the last century plus. So the British are coming into the 20th century, and what happened? They ran up against democracy. So here's the major forces of belief systems, economies, and governments clashed in the 1800s. The British were riding a wave of scientific innovation, along with a unified monarchist government with a Church of England, an official religion, along with a banking system run through the Bank of England and all the rich people, and they had an aristocracy who was validated by noblesse oblige and the divine right of kings. There was a rationale to God save the king, God bless the queen, God save the king. Whatever it was, it all worked. It worked for centuries because lots of resources were flowing back home. And England became probably one of the richest countries in history, up through the 1800s. But so much so that they were spewing offspring, like all the colonies in the States, and we broke off. The U.S. was big enough to pull itself together and say, we're not going to do the monarchy thing. We're going to break away from that. And what happened there? They broke away because they wanted independence, and that democracy that emerged in America, that had broken away from the authoritarian rule of kings and churches, said no more churches, no more kings. And we just minded our own business and watched as the empires fell apart, as the monarchies with their big churches in Europe that had fueled colonial expansion for centuries fell by the wayside. And what did they fall to? They fell to democracy. That was the next big wave. Once we started doing urbanization and industrialization, and we started doing some schools and literacy increased, people were able to talk to each other intelligently and realize, oh, all this power doesn't have to be inside of the church or the state. We can keep our own books. We can measure our own accounts. And the merchant class arose, and they challenged the aristocracy and the whole idea of royal blood. So we got away from biology. So that's the first thing that happened way back at that node. All through that century, physics and chemistry led the way with the scientific charge, and biology hadn't caught up yet. And that's where we are right now. That's why we're pushing the second node right now. Because the idea of aristocracy is to say that biology is really important. Biology creates bloodlines, and we've known for years. That was the first big step for civilization in the first place, doing agriculture. We've known for years there's something about inheritance. We know there's something intrinsic to the biological systems. We know there are evil vapors that eventually became the germ theory. We figured out a lot of stuff biologically, but it was always peripheral. It was just a matter of considered the basics. You had to have sex to have babies, and so we regulated sex. You had to have food to eat, so we regulated farming. And wealth, until the Industrial Revolution, was based on biological systems. But then when the Industrial Revolution hit, when science finally amassed enough information, enough knowledge, that technology could just explode, which is what it did in the 1800s. And we figured out steam engines and railroads and telegraphs and telephones and air flight and munitions, oh my goodness, and communications, and so many things. And that exploded in the 1800s and drastically changed the society. It allowed for more communication. So those people who could now read, who'd been getting books, and printing presses expanding, and radio and television, all of that gave more information more rapidly, which allowed people to organize and say, hey, you know what? We don't have to be organized under the king. We can organize ourselves locally. We can just do this on our own. We can do our own business, keep our own books, do our own trade, and screw you guys. And that's what started in the 1800s. And that's when Victoria died and the empires fell apart and they got into squabbling and had World War I. And then we had dictators arise trying to take over from the aristocrats with Hitler and Stalin and those fun guys. And we got into the Cold War finally. Because we got into the Cold War because the Western democracies won. We said, we're not going to do the aristocracy thing. We're not going to do the church thing. But the church thing was a little confusing. There was no formal guarantee of that one. But we got away from the king thing, and we went with the democracy thing. And so we settled on what's the next big thing is going to be the economy thing. How do we distribute resources? And that was really, in my mind, what the Cold War was. It was capitalism. It was decentralized economy versus centralized economy. Because that's what the Soviets did. They wanted to control everything because they were poor. They didn't have enough resources. And America had more resources. And we could afford to let people go off on their own and waste resources because we had an excess. And it was so much so an excess that we dumped so much stuff into World War II that we came out the victors. And everybody else was left. And that's where America plateaued as empire. Because we were able to supply everybody starting in the 40s. We turned all that military-industrial complex into consumer industrial complexes. Not that we got rid of the military one. We just made more of it as consumer. And then what did we do? We built an empire. We built a global empire. We said, we're going to build our navy, build our military. Oh, France, you fucked up in Vietnam. We'll take over. We'll pick up the baton. And so we picked up the baton in Vietnam. But then people started realizing, and we said, we're going to go to space. We're going to go to the fucking moon. I mean, that's what I grew up with. I grew up in the 60s. I was born in 1960, technically under the Eisenhower administration. I, like Ike, and moved into Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon. And what happened during that time, as I was growing up, becoming a conscious human, I looked around me, and what did I see? I saw sitcoms and cartoons on TV. I saw a Catholic school where I went. I saw my little extended family of 25 first cousins, and a little matriarchy on my grandmother's side who ran a family business. And so she was in charge of the family because Grandpa had died, and she made money. She had the authority of family and the money to back it up, which always pissed off my father. That's a whole other story. But anyway, point being, I grew up fairly a middle class American at the peak of the American Empire, where I just thought, we're on top of the world. I wanted to be James Bond. I wanted to be Neil Armstrong. I wanted to go to the moon. I wanted to fly planes and be a secret agent and do all sorts of fun stuff like that. Because I thought that's what there was. And then I got a little head smack in the 70s We got into the 70s, got into high school, hit puberty. That's always fun. Uh, and what did I see for government? I saw government cheat significantly for the first time and get caught. And that was the criticism against Tricky Dick, or the criticism that was actually the excuses that were mostly generated for Tricky Dick Nixon, is that, oh, he wasn't doing anything anybody else did. He just got caught. And he got caught in that point where we said, oh, government's no good. And that really was the start. That was we had to make a decision. So talking about evolutionary nodes, we branched, think about those three big variables. Think about how government's organized. Think about how economies are run, and think about belief systems. So 1900, we've still got a heavy Christian influence. We've got industrialism coming in from science, running the economy, all these new technologies. America's still expanding. We haven't gotten even close to 40 to 50 states yet. So we're close to 50 states. We've still got a handful to come in. A bunch of them came in the early 1900s. Arizona and a lot of the western states were still cowboys and Indians out there. That's what we were doing. That was still our government. It was still pretty wild. And we tacked on in World War One, because what happened then? All those monarchies in Europe, all of our ancestors, as far as civilizations. I mean, we're a byproduct of Western civilization, and we had taken democracy from monarchy, and then monarchy fell apart. That was a big node. That was the start of our ascendancy. They said, oh, the kids can help. We'll get the Americans to help. They have lots of resources. They're not old, decrepit, used-up countries like they had in Europe, where people had been for thousands of years and settled all the land. And so we went through the first half of the 20th century supporting our parents, just like any situation. There are parallels all through life. And just like you might find yourself nowadays taking care of an elderly parent because of all the medical advances that keep people alive longer, civilizations step up a little bit. You have a little allegiance to whoever you descended from. And so we helped out Europe. That was helping out mom and dad, as it were. And we got into those world wars, and we realized we ended up on top, purely by default. We were last man standing. That was the deal. For 1945, we'd figured out nukes. Well, nukes added a whole other point to the equation, too, because now nuclear weapons changed the perspective of government, of how you can do warfare. I mean, warfare was bad enough, but when you have a democracy versus a monarchy, if the king tells you to go, you go. But in a democracy, somebody might say, wait a minute. And that's what happened in Vietnam. But the nuclear war, once we had a generation growing up with nuclear weapons, we had people who were willing to step up and ask the question, because we were democracies, and say, wait a minute. Because that's what happened in Vietnam. People started saying, wait a minute, do we want to be doing this? Do we want to be killing other people and conducting these colonial wars? Because that's what that was the course correction. That was the opening of a new node. That was asking finally the big question. Who should have a say in how society is run? That's the ultimate node for government. And that we've been trying to sort that one out for the last century. Because up through the 1900s, it was all monarchs and kings and dictators. Whoever had the most weapons said, this is it. But civilization isn't just about that. Civilization is about beliefs. And there's still a lot of religious belief out there, but I think we could have more belief in science. And if we had enough belief in science to appreciate that we are mostly hairless apes, who are evolving social primates, who have hit a point in history where we have access to amazing technology and global communication networks, and the idea that we could organize ourselves into self-governing systems should be completed. We should be able to use those three basic ideas for our government and our economy and our belief system to be able to say, hey, you know what? We can solve any problem. We can solve any problem if we all figure out how to do it, how to address it, how to throw resources at it, how to work on it and solve that problem. And then what happens when we solve that problem, we'll go to the next problem. But, and government, that's all governments have ever done. I mean, that's really why we get together in the first place. We get together to solve a problem. If I didn't have to deal with other people, I would prefer to just stay at the farm, hang out in the woods, and not do this. But we all live with other people, and we put up with more people when we have to, or when we can get something done from it. We could solve a problem that I couldn't solve on myself. I could ask somebody for help. That's a cool thing. So depending on what project you're taking on, you could ask for different amounts of help, and that's how government's evolved. And so, how do you regulate the group? That's the whole question. We said we got rid of monarchy. We had democracy. Okay, everybody likes being in charge of their own life. We like freedom. We like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's where the government selective pressure is right now. That's where the government selective pressure is, at least in terms of personal philosophy, personal consciousness, the essence of humanity. Well, what's the economy say? The economy is capitalism. Capitalism beat communism. We have decentralized economies, and that's why we're having cyber currency, and that's why we're having BRICS agenda. People are going, you know what? The currency is regulated by some dictatorial power that we call banks, and so we got to deal with them. All right, so we're going to have different currencies, because we don't want to have the dollar's taking a hit right now. And it's probably going to take more. It's probably going to suck for America. Once you're on the plateau, where do you go? There aren't any more peaks to climb other than conquering the planet. And we don't seem to be doing that very well. We don't seem to have a decent plan for that, because shooting at everybody is not going to do it. Trying to buy everything or sell everything at a marked up price is not going to do it. So we got to figure out a different way. If we want our economy to lead the world, we have to figure out a different way to do it. And we're trying. We're doing information stuff. We're doing robotics. We're doing AI. Sure, that stuff might work, but I don't know. But maybe there's a few other things we could do. And then the last one is the belief system. You gotta believe that science is the best thing we've got. You've got to accept the doubt that comes with saying, you know what? There might not be any big brother out there. There might not be any mom or dad in the sky. There's no sky gods, no big fathers or mothers or whoever. We're on our own in an impartial universe that maybe has other intelligent, evolved life forms out there. Maybe that would seem statistically quite possible. But whether or not we ever get a chance to communicate with them, and there's probably technologies beyond that they might have come up with, sure. So we should get ready for alien space invasions. I would put that on the problem list, not the most immediate problem, but that's something that we should address at some point in the future, assuming we survive, to be a global civilization. Which is my point. That's the point I've been trying to get to, is that's the node we are at right now. That is the evolutionary node for civilizations. We are at the cusp of being able to form a global civilization. And we tried to do it at the end of World War II. We formed the UN. We had, strike one was the League of Nations. The UN is strike two. And the people are saying, oh, do we want to have a world court? Do we want to have all of these things? And I said, I don't know. So here's strike three. We got 2 strikes. The UN's not working. Because I think what's fucked up is the nation-state thing. So we have to redirect. We have to decide what we're going to do. So we were doing independence. This is what stopped in the 80s. This is the node where it branched. So we go through the 70s. We survived Vietnam. We were saying, hey, do we want to do colonialism anymore? We deal with the Cold War. That's still dealing with the Cold War. We start dealing with religious issues. That's when they first started raising the abortion issue back in the 70s, because we started questioning authority. That's why abortion became an issue in the 70s, and gender and drugs and sex. Who cares who's having sex, what drugs anybody's taking? Either you show up for work and do your job, or you don't. See, on one hand, this is the bullshit. This is where the bullshit gets really heavy, and they try to confuse us all the time. As they go back and forth and this is why it's so ridiculous to deal with modern Republicans. Because old Republicans used to be conservatives and just said, no, let's not change anything. Let's just keep it stable. And that's a good piece of advice. That's the essence of the definition of conservative. Versus progressive is, well, no, what should we change? Well, I don't know. What do you want to change? We could try something. We could experiment with something. Let's experiment with one thing at a time. And let's see if we can say, well, what happens if we allow this to happen? And then you make a law and you run with it. Then you go back and you review it. That would be like mature civilization. If we could stabilize all the basics. Obviously, first we got to stabilize all the biology. And I think we're well beyond stabilizing all of our global economy, balancing resources, paying reparations, doing taxation, any of that bullshit. That's going to go on. They're all going to do that. Here's the revolution that I think we need to take on. Here's the node I think we can branch from. We could say, hey, you know what? I'm a member of the Evolving Church of Science. I'm only going to deal with professional behavior from now on. I'm going to form a legal entity with fellow responsible adults, and we are going to form ultimate liability corporations, which take care of a certain set of humans from cradle to grave. And from cradle to grave, we're going to take care of each other. That's it. For whatever reason. For whatever fucking reason you think. And that's the thing. And that would be, in my ideal world, every group like that, every ultimate liability corporation would accept the challenge every year of saying, hey, what are you working on? What's your problem? And they could be asked that, and they would have a very specific answer. They would say, well, but in addition to staying alive and having a little fun and just trying to get through my life, I'm working on this. This is what we're working on. And we're solving a problem. And that's what everybody should do. Everybody should stop their bitching and moaning and vegging out and watching on TV and being numbed by cable and watching the idiot box, as we used to call TV, and playing on your computers and playing on your video games and vaping and doing whatever. You can vape, I guess. So drugs are okay. As long as you get the job done. That should be the only criterion of capitalism. This is ultimate capitalism. If you want capitalism, capitalism is, what have you done for me lately? What have you worked on? What problem have you solved for me? Because that's all anybody gets paid for. Think about it. The reason you take money, we all do work that doesn't get paid for. We all help out with our families to whatever extent. We all do chores. We all do personal maintenance. We all take out the garbage. We all flush the toilet. We all bathe. You have basic functions that have to happen. And you might not want to do it certain days, whatever one, but you do it because you're a mature, responsible, professional adult. And I use professional because that includes the economy then. Because a professional is somebody who has enough skills at whatever level to do a profession, to do something that allows them to support themselves. And by supporting themselves, I mean they can support themselves from cradle to grave. And if not, you need some help. And that's the whole point. That's why we would join up in different organizations. We would join up, and you have to have some compensation of responsible and unresponsible people. That's going to be the problem, because we're humans, because we're evolving biological species. It takes us 20 years to develop. Right now, we're living an average of 80 years. About 3% of humans are born with congenital defects. How are we going to handle all those people? We have to bond them together into legal, governmental, economic, spiritual entities. And that's the node that we need to be on. That's going to be the core of the new world government in the Evolving Church of Science, as I see it. It's going to be individual groups. It's going to be all it's ever been. It's going to be small groups of people taking care of each other. That's what society is. That's the core of our civilization. That's what we evolved from as hunter-gatherers. Tens of thousands of years ago, the first cave paintings and mammoth hunts were organized in the building of places like Göbekli Tepe and Stonehenge and the pyramids. And societies obviously got bigger because they organized around different principles. And if we want to build monuments that are like the temples and the pyramids, we're going to have to get a lot of groups together. And you can do that by conquering them, or you could do that by making an agreement. Have an idea and say, hey, here's the deal. Here's the business deal. Here's the contract. And you know what? By my sacred honor, I'm going to honor that contract. That's what fucking Nixon did. He broke away from honor. Honor is a good thing. We need to have it. An officer and a gentleman, a professional. These things matter. We threw them all out with aristocracy, and we need to recover them, because you have to have honor. You have to believe in something. What they believed was bullshit, because it was them staying in power because of genetic history. But maybe they were right. You know what? This is the beautiful thing about the Evolving Church of Science. This is going to be a global experiment. That's all it ever is anyway. The evolutionary journey we're all on is really an experiment. We try something. If it doesn't work, you change it. If you don't change it, you're an idiot. So let's go out and change something. That's a good idea. Go out and change the world.